In 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed a bill into law that paid out $300 to slave owners per slave that they set free. Do you believe this was the best course of action that Lincoln could have taken to abolish slavery? And should that money that was paid to the slave owners be circulated into the families of enslaved ancestors?
Okay. Assuming all these facts are true, in 1862, slaves weren't freed. So in 1862, I believe Lincoln would have been paying off slave owners to free slaves in Union states. I think it's a little known fact that there were Union states that were slave owners. Delaware and Kentucky were the last two slave owner states in the Union to release slaves in actually 1866, which was Juneteenth. And we're all celebrating that right now. Way to go, Juneteenth. Far overdue. Should have been honored as a federal holiday back in 1866, if you ask me. But the question here is 1862 or it was prior to 1865 that Abraham Lincoln, the greatest president we ever had in this country, the bravest president we ever had in this country, was fighting social injustice beyond what we're even talking and thinking about now. The man got murdered for his social injustice actions. But in 1862, he offered money to the slave holders to free the slaves in the Union states before the Emancipation Proclamation. So think about that for a second. He's paying the slave owners to release the slaves. Now, if you sit here right now and you're on one side of the fence, you're saying, oh, that's crazy. The slaves are still getting ripped off. They're not getting paid. I think that's where this question is going to from somebody, and someone's trying to ask me to basically justify Abraham Lincoln's actions to paying off the slave owners versus the slaves who've been doing all the work for free for so many years. And yeah, that is injustice. But I think we have to understand the timing of this question is just this. Abraham Lincoln was desperate to free the slaves. Only thing on his mind was to free the slaves. We must free the slaves. How can we free the slaves? We can't get the votes. We can't do this. But some of these Union states were behind it getting done. And as a Republican, liberal party congressperson, or at any given time, he's been trying to find a way to free these slaves. And when he got power, he said, I'll pay you to free the slaves. Anything. And he paid them $300 a slave in the Union states to release them and create their freedom. Now, I guarantee you that those slaves that were freed in the Union because of that $300 a slave to the slave owner were not complaining about that money going to the slave owner at that time. These were different times. They were happy. They were free at last. Now, I think $300 a slave in 1862 is probably millions today. And I don't know where that money would come from, because this question asking person wants to know we should give it back to the slaves. But I got news for them. All those slaves are dead. All those slave owners are gone. We're in a new era. But I do think that we need to be aware of these things. Reparations, ironically enough, was for slave owners versus slaves. And that's a concept that's hard to stomach. I will tell you this, though. A little known fact about slaves and what's going on in this time is that those type of slaves that he freed were called chattel slaves. And the reason they were called chattel slave is because the word is very close to the word cattle. A chattel slave is basically a noun, but not a person, but a place or a thing. It's been dehumanized. Abraham Lincoln understood this, and he knew that any slave born into chatteled parenting, the son or the daughter was deemed a chatteled slave as well for life. Abraham Lincoln was desperate to stop this cycle at any cost. So yes, I think it seems very strange that the slave was not paid reparation, but the slave owner was. The slave owner had to give up a way of life. He had to give up a way of times and no ways of making money, but in a differently format. So I think that what he did was noble, I think what he did was right for the time. I think that we do need to continue to understand where all this racism comes from and where it starts. I think that the mindset of a white man must change. I think the mindset of any racist Caucasian human being must understand the word chattel. If you understand the word chattel, you'll understand where the word racism began and why it's still coursing through the veins of a lot of people in America today. Thank you, Abraham Lincoln, for being brave enough to even pay a slave owner to free a slave. Thank you, Abraham Lincoln, for the Emancipation Proclamation. Thank you for all the brave slaves and minorities that have freed themselves and fought through the times over 200 years. I don't understand it. I'll never understand it. But I can try. That's me, wired differently.